The real estate agent's clipboard was still warm from the printer when I signed the listing agreement. Just a simple garage sale, I told myself, staring at the weathered wooden doors that had been padlocked for 3 years. Clear it out, list the property, move on. But when those rusted locks finally gave way, what I found inside would shatter everything I thought I knew about my husband Jack Fuller, and reveal a secret so devastating it would change not just my understanding of our marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But my entire sense of reality. My name is Helen Alves-Fuller, and for 18 years, I believed I was married to a man who restored classic motorcycles as a hobby. Jack was methodical, quiet, the kind of husband who fixed the leaky faucet before I even noticed it was dripping. He worked as a logistics coordinator for a shipping company downtown, brought me coffee every Saturday morning, and never missed our anniversary dinner at Romano's. We had a comfortable life in our split-level house on Maple Street, complete with a 2-car garage attached to the house, and a separate, larger garage out back that Jack had claimed as his workshop. That back garage was Jack's sanctuary. Just old bike parts and tools, he'd say, whenever I suggested we clean it out or use it for storage. Nothing you'd find interesting, Helen. Besides, the humidity would ruin your crafting supplies. I never pressed the issue. In 18 years of marriage, Jack had given me no reason to doubt his word about anything. He was reliable, predictable, and refreshingly uncomplicated. Or so I thought. Jack died on a Wednesday in March, 3 years ago. Sudden cardiac arrest while loading boxes at work. The paramedics said it was instantaneous. He wouldn't have felt any pain. I remember thinking how typical that was of Jack, to die efficiently, without causing a fuss or disrupting anyone's schedule. The funeral was exactly what he would have wanted, small, dignified, over quickly. His co-workers from the shipping company spoke about his attention to detail and punctuality. Our neighbors mentioned his willingness to help with yard work. Everyone agreed that Jack Fuller had been a good man who lived a quiet, honest life. For 3 years after his death, I left that back garage exactly as it was. I couldn't bear to go through his things, to dismantle the space that had brought him so much peace. I told myself I was honoring his memory, but honestly I was just avoiding the painful work of sorting through a lifetime of accumulated belongings. The garage sat behind our house like a monument to my grief, growing more weathered with each passing season. But grief, I've learned, has an expiration date when it comes to practicality. Last month I finally accepted that I couldn't afford to keep the house. My job at the public library barely covered the mortgage and utilities, and Jack's modest life insurance had been spent long ago on funeral costs and catching up on bills. The house was too big for one person anyway, filled with echoes and memories that felt heavier each day. I needed to downsize, to start fresh somewhere smaller and more manageable. That's when Corinne Simmons, the real estate agent recommended by my neighbor, suggested listing the property as a package deal. The back garage is actually a selling point, she said, walking around the perimeter with her measuring tape. Workshop space is popular with buyers, but we'll need to clear it out completely for showings. Buyers want to see the potential, not someone else's abandoned projects. I nodded, signed the paperwork, and promised to have the garage cleaned out within the week. How hard could it be? Jack had always been organized. I expected to find neat rows of motorcycle parts, maybe some vintage tools worth selling separately, and boxes of manuals and spare parts that could go straight to donation. I scheduled a dumpster delivery for Friday and arranged for my nephew Gabriel to help with the heavy lifting on Saturday morning. The padlocks were harder to remove than I'd anticipated. Jack had secured the garage with 2 heavy-duty locks, both showing signs of regular use despite being exposed to 3 years of weather. When Gabriel arrived with his bolt cutters, he whistled low. "Uncle Jack really didn't want anyone getting in here, did he?" he said, examining the locks. "These are expensive. Military grade." That should have been my first clue that something was off. Jack was practical about security, but he wasn't paranoid. Why would he need military-grade locks on a garage full of motorcycle parts? The locks cut easily enough, but the garage doors themselves stuck badly. It took both Gabriel and me pulling together to get them moved. The metal hinges groaning in protest after years of disuse. The smell hit us first, not the expected odor of motor oil and metal, but something else. Something clean and artificial, like hospital disinfectant mixed with new carpet. The garage wasn't dark inside. That was the second thing that struck me as wrong. Jack had always complained about the poor lighting in his workshop, but bright fluorescent fixtures now lined the ceiling, casting everything in harsh, even illumination. The concrete floor wasn't stained with oil and grease as I'd expected. Instead, it was pristine, covered with a gray industrial epoxy coating that looked like it had been applied recently. And there were no motorcycles, no bike parts, no tools hanging on pegboard walls. Instead, the garage had been converted into something that looked like an office, but not any office I'd ever seen. 3 large desks dominated the space, each equipped with multiple computer monitors that were dark but clearly expensive. Filing cabinets lined one wall, each secured with combination locks. A large whiteboard covered another wall, wiped clean but showing ghost traces of diagrams and text that had been erased. Gabriel let out a low whistle behind me. "Aunt Helen," he said slowly, "what kind of motorcycles was Uncle Jack supposed to be working on?" I couldn't answer him. I was staring at a corkboard mounted near one of the desks, covered with what looked like surveillance photos. Black and white images of people I didn't recognize, taken from a distance with telephoto lenses. Street corners, office buildings, parking lots. The photos were organized with colored pins and string, like something from a detective show. In the center of the corkboard was a larger photo that made my blood run cold. It was our house, taken from across the street, showing me in the front yard gardening. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been taken just 6 months before Jack died. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been watching me. Gabriel moved to one of the filing cabinets and tried the handle. "Locked," he said, unnecessarily. "All of them are locked." He looked at me with concern. "Aunt Helen, I don't think Uncle Jack was restoring motorcycles back here." I stood in the middle of that sterile, mysterious space, trying to reconcile the garage I was seeing with the husband I thought I'd known. Jack Fuller, who brought me coffee, and fixed leaky faucets and never caused a fuss about anything. Jack Fuller, who had apparently been living some kind of double life in a secret office hidden behind our house. The worst part wasn't the shock of discovery. It was the growing realization that this was just the beginning. If Jack had lied about something this fundamental, this elaborate, then what else had he been hiding? And more importantly, who else knew about this place? Who had been taking those surveillance photos, and why was I in them? I reached for my phone to call Corinne and cancel the listing. Suddenly, selling the house was the last thing on my mind. I needed answers first, and I had the terrible feeling that getting those answers was going to change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my supposedly ordinary deceased husband. Some secrets, I was about to learn, don't die with the people who keep them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those surveillance photos, the sterile office space, the military-grade locks that Gabriel had cut through with such difficulty. I kept thinking about all the Saturday mornings when Jack would disappear into that garage for hours at a time, emerging only for lunch with grease under his fingernails that I now realized might not have been grease at all. I sat at our kitchen table, my kitchen table now, I had to keep reminding myself, with a cup of tea growing cold between my hands, trying to piece together 18 years of marriage through the lens of what I'd discovered. How many times had Jack lied to me? How many casual conversations about his motorcycle hobby had been complete fabrications? The man I'd married at 28 had been different from the Jack I'd buried 3 years ago, but I'd attributed that to natural aging, to the comfortable settling that happens in long marriages. We'd met at a bookstore downtown, both reaching for the same mystery novel. Jack had been charming then, spontaneous, full of stories about places he'd traveled and people he'd met. But over the years, those stories had stopped. He'd become more routine-oriented, more private, claiming that he preferred the quiet life we'd built together. Now I wondered if those early stories had been true, or if Jack Fuller had always been someone else entirely, wearing the mask of an ordinary logistics coordinator, like a costume he put on each morning. I thought about our wedding day, held in the small chapel on Pine Street with 37 guests. Jack's side of the church had been notably sparse, just a few co-workers and his elderly Aunt Louise from Portland, Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who died just 2 years into our marriage. Jack had explained his small family by saying his parents had died young, that he'd been mostly raised by distant relatives who'd lost touch over the years. I'd felt sorry for him then, having come from a large, boisterous family myself. Now I wondered if there had been any relatives at all, or if Aunt Louise had been another fiction in Jack's carefully constructed life. Gabriel called me around 7 in the morning. "Aunt Helen, I barely slept," he said, without preamble. "That place yesterday, it's been bothering me all night. I keep thinking about those locks, about how clean everything was. When was the last time you actually saw Uncle Jack working on a motorcycle?" The question stopped me cold. Gabriel was 24, sharp, worked in IT for a tech company downtown. He'd always been the type to notice details that others missed. "I don't think I ever actually saw him working on one," I admitted slowly. "He always said the bikes were in pieces too messy for me to see, or that he was waiting for parts to arrive. But you must have seen him come and go from the garage, right? Covered in grease, carrying tools." I tried to remember, really remember, not just the general impression I'd carried for years. "He'd come in clean," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical. In the center of the corkboard was a larger photo that made my blood run cold. It was our house, taken from across the street, showing me in the front yard gardening. The timestamp in the corner showed it had been taken just 6 months before Jack died. Someone had been watching us. Someone had been watching me. Gabriel moved to one of the filing cabinets and tried the handle. "Locked," he said, unnecessarily. "All of them are locked." He looked at me with concern. "Aunt Helen, I don't think Uncle Jack was restoring motorcycles back here." I stood in the middle of that sterile, mysterious space, trying to reconcile the garage I was seeing with the husband I thought I'd known. Jack Fuller, who brought me coffee, and fixed leaky faucets and never caused a fuss about anything. Jack Fuller, who had apparently been living some kind of double life in a secret office hidden behind our house. The worst part wasn't the shock of discovery, it was the growing realization that this was just the beginning. If Jack had lied about something this fundamental, this elaborate, then what else had he been hiding? And more importantly, who else knew about this place? Who had been taking those surveillance photos, and why was I in them? I reached for my phone to call Corinne and cancel the listing. Suddenly, selling the house was the last thing on my mind. I needed answers first, and I had the terrible feeling that getting those answers was going to change everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, and my supposedly ordinary deceased husband. Some secrets, I was about to learn, don't die with the people who keep them. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those surveillance photos, the sterile office space, the military-grade locks that Gabriel had cut. "I'll come with you," he said immediately. "This is too weird to handle alone." We agreed to meet at Morrison Logistics that afternoon. I spent the morning going through Jack's desk in our home office, something I'd avoided doing since his death, leaving his papers and belongings untouched, like another shrine to grief. But now I approached his personal space with different eyes, looking not for memories but for evidence. His desk drawers contained the usual items: pens, paper clips, old receipts, but in the bottom drawer, tucked behind a stack of old tax returns, I found something that made my hands shake. A business card for a private investigation firm in Chicago, the corners worn soft with handling. On the back, someone had written, "Ask for Zach," in handwriting that wasn't Jack's. Chicago was 800 miles away. Jack had never mentioned having business there, never traveled there that I knew of. But the card looked well used, as if it had been handled frequently. I slipped the card into my purse and continued searching. In Jack's address book, the old-fashioned paper kind he'd insisted on keeping, despite my suggestions to go digital, I found dozens of names I didn't recognize. No addresses, just names with phone numbers, many of them marked with small symbols, stars, dots, check marks. It looked like a code, but a code for what? By the time I met Gabriel at Morrison Logistics, I was carrying a manila folder full of items I'd never noticed before: business cards for companies in distant cities, phone numbers with no names attached, receipts for purchases I couldn't remember Jack making. Each piece was small and seemingly innocent on its own, but together they painted a picture of a man living a life I'd never been allowed to see. The Morrison Logistics building was smaller than I'd expected, tucked between a dental office and a dry cleaner in a strip mall on the outskirts of town. When we walked through the front door, the receptionist looked up with a polite but puzzled expression. "We're here about Jack Fuller," I said. "I'm his widow, Helen. I was hoping to speak with his supervisor about some paperwork." The woman's expression shifted to one of genuine confusion. "I'm sorry," she said slowly, "but I don't think we've ever had anyone by that name working here. How long ago did you say he was employed with us?" The folder slipped from my hands, papers scattering across the cheap commercial carpeting. Gabriel knelt to help me gather them up, but I barely noticed. Jack had never worked at Morrison Logistics. For 15 years, he'd left our house every morning, claiming to go to a job that didn't exist, which meant that for 15 years, my husband had been going somewhere else entirely. The drive home from Morrison Logistics passed in a blur. Gabriel drove while I sat in the passenger seat, staring at the business card from Chicago, turning it over and over in my hands like it might reveal its secrets through repetition. My entire understanding of my marriage had just collapsed in the span of a single conversation with a confused receptionist. "Aunt Helen," Gabriel said softly as we pulled into my driveway, "we need to call the police." I looked up at him, this young man who'd suddenly become my anchor in a world that no longer made sense. "And tell them what?" "That my dead husband lied about his job, that I found an office in our garage and some old business cards." "What crime has been committed, Gabriel? What law has been broken?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Identity fraud, maybe. If he was pretending to work somewhere, he didn't actually work. If he was filing false tax returns." But even as he said it, we both knew it wasn't enough. The police would ask the same questions I was asking myself. Where had Jack's paychecks come from? How had we paid our mortgage and bills for 15 years if he wasn't actually employed? And those were questions I wasn't ready to answer, because I was beginning to suspect that the answers would be far worse than simple unemployment fraud. That evening I did something I hadn't done since Jack's death. I went through our financial records with a magnifying glass. Not the casual review I'd done to settle his estate, but a forensic examination of every deposit, every withdrawal, every transfer that had moved through our joint checking account for the past 5 years. What I found made my hands shake so badly I had to set down my reading glasses. "Gizen I dondera, this book are mailing gosses." Jack's paychecks from Morrison Logistics had indeed appeared in our account every 2 weeks, regular as clockwork. But they hadn't come from Morrison Logistics. They'd come from something called Meridian Consulting Services, a company I'd never heard of. The amounts varied slightly, sometimes $2,847, sometimes $3,156, sometimes $2,990, but they always fell within a narrow range that seemed designed to look like legitimate salary payments. I pulled out our tax returns from the past 5 years. Jack had always handled our taxes, claiming it was simpler since his finances were straightforward, and mine were just the library's direct deposit. Every April, he'd present me with forms to sign, explaining the deductions and credits in his patient, methodical way. I'd never questioned him. Why would I? Now looking at the returns with new eyes, I saw that Jack had listed his employer as Morrison Logistics on every single form. He'd reported the income from Meridian Consulting, but attributed it to a company that had never heard of him, which meant our tax returns were fraudulent, which meant I had unknowingly been signing false documents for years. The phone rang, startling me out of my financial archaeology. I didn't recognize the number, but something made me answer anyway. "Mrs. Fuller." The voice was male, professional, with a slight accent I couldn't place. "This is Jason Link. I was a colleague of your husband's. I was wondering if we might arrange a time to meet." My blood went cold. "I'm sorry, but I think you have the wrong number. My husband didn't have any colleagues. He worked alone." There was a pause, then a soft chuckle. "Mrs. Fuller, I think we both know that isn't true. I was hoping we could discuss this in person. There are some matters regarding Jack's projects that need to be resolved." I don't know what you're talking about, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to my own ears. The garage, Mrs. Fuller. I know you've been inside it. I know you've seen the office, and I know you have questions about what Jack was really doing all those years. Another pause. I have answers, but they're not the kind of answers you discuss over the phone. May I suggest we meet tomorrow? Somewhere public, if that would make you more comfortable. Every instinct told me to hang up, to pretend this conversation had never happened, to go back to my simple life of grief and financial worry, but I couldn't unknow what I'd already discovered. I couldn't unsee the surveillance photos or unfind the fake paychecks, or unlearn that my husband had been living a completely fabricated life. How did you get this number? I asked. Jack gave it to me years ago, in case of emergency. Mrs. Fuller, I want you to understand something. Jack was a good man who got involved in something complicated. He was trying to protect you by keeping you separate from his work. But now that he's gone, that separation is problematic. Problematic how? There are people who believe Jack left behind certain materials, certain information, that belongs to them. They're going to come looking for it eventually. When they do, it would be better for everyone if you were prepared. I thought about the locked filing cabinets in the garage, about the surveillance equipment and the mysterious business cards. What kind of materials? The kind that could put you in danger if the wrong people think you have them. Jack was supposed to have destroyed everything when he retired, but we have reason to believe he kept copies. Insurance, you might say. Retired. Jack had never mentioned retiring from anything, but then again, Jack had never mentioned most of his actual life. Where do you want to meet? I heard myself asking. Do you know the Riverside Diner on Highway 9? It's public, busy, safe. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. After I hung up, I sat in Jack's home office, surrounded by evidence of his deception, trying to process what I'd just committed to. Someone who claimed to be Jack's colleague wanted to meet with me about materials Jack might have hidden, materials that could put me in danger. I called Gabriel. I'm coming with you, he said, immediately after I explained the call. Gabriel, I don't want to drag you into this. If this man is telling the truth about danger, then you definitely shouldn't go alone. Besides, I'm already involved. I'm the one who cut those locks, remember? I'm the one who saw the surveillance photos. We're in this together now, Aunt Helen. That night, I packed a bag and drove to Gabriel's apartment. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the house, knowing that Jack had been living a double life under the same roof where I'd trusted him completely. Every corner of our home now felt contaminated with lies. Gabriel's couch was uncomfortable, but exhaustion eventually won over anxiety. My last conscious thought was wondering what Jack would say if he could see me now, his trusting wife, forced to piece together the truth he'd spent 18 years hiding from me. But Jack was gone, and the truth, I was beginning to realize, was far more dangerous than the lies had ever been. The Riverside Diner sat on a busy stretch of Highway 9, the kind of place truckers and traveling salesmen stopped for coffee and pie. Gabriel and I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth near the window where we could see the parking lot. I'd barely slept the night before, my mind racing through scenarios of who Jason Link might be, and what he really wanted. There, Gabriel said, nodding toward a black sedan that had just pulled into the lot. That's got to be him. The man who emerged from the car looked exactly like what I'd imagined a colleague of Jack's secret life might look like, mid-50s, average height, wearing a gray suit that was expensive but not flashy. He moved with the kind of controlled precision that suggested military or law enforcement background. When he scanned the diner's interior through the window, his eyes found mine immediately, as if he'd known exactly where we'd be sitting. Jason Link was not what I'd expected up close. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, his smile genuine but careful. He slid into the booth across from us, with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to difficult conversations. Mrs. Fuller, thank you for meeting with me, and you must be Gabriel. He shook my nephew's hand as well, though his eyes lingered on Gabriel's face with an expression I couldn't quite read. You have your uncle's eyes. Jack wasn't my uncle by blood, Gabriel said carefully. He married into our family. Jason's smile didn't waver, but something shifted in his expression. Well, of course, my mistake. He gestured to the waitress for coffee, then folded his hands on the table. I imagine you have questions. I have about 1,000 questions, I said. Starting with who you really are, and how you knew my husband. Jason reached into his jacket, slowly, keeping his movements visible, and pulled out a leather wallet. Inside was an ID card that made my stomach drop. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Jason Link, Financial Crimes Division. Jack was one of our informants, he said simply. Had been for almost 12 years. Gabriel and I exchanged glances. An FBI informant. That explained the office, the surveillance equipment, the careful compartmentalization of his life. But it raised even more questions. Informant for what? I asked. Money laundering primarily, corporate fraud. Jack had a very particular skill set. He was excellent at building false identities, creating believable paper trails, moving money in ways that were difficult to trace. Before he started working with us, he used those skills for less legitimate purposes. The words hit me like physical blows. My husband, the man who'd brought me coffee every Saturday morning, had been a criminal, and then he'd become a federal informant. The garage, Gabriel said. That was his base of operations, one of them. Jack maintained several workspaces, but yes, that was his primary location for the past 5 years. We helped him set it up when he moved operations closer to home. Jason paused, studying my face. Mrs. Fuller, how much did you know about Jack's financial situation when you married him? What do you mean? I mean, did you ever wonder how a man with no college degree, no family money, and no documented work history before age 30 was able to put a down payment on a house and maintain a comfortable middle-class lifestyle? I thought back to our early years of marriage. Jack had indeed seemed financially stable from the beginning, but I'd attributed it to his being older than me, more established. He said he'd saved money from various jobs. Jack Fuller didn't exist before 1998, Jason said gently. The man you married had been operating under at least 3 different identities before he settled on that one. His real name was Jonathan Kellerman. The diner suddenly felt too small, too bright, too full of the everyday sounds of normal people living normal lives. You're telling me even his name was fake? I'm telling you that the man you knew as Jack Fuller was trying very hard to leave his old life behind when he met you. Working with the FBI was part of that. He provided information that helped us shut down 2 major money laundering operations and recover over $40 million in stolen assets. Gabriel leaned forward. But if he was helping you, why all the secrecy? Why didn't he just tell Helen the truth? Jason's expression grew somber. Because the people Jack helped us catch are the kind who hold grudges. Long grudges. As long as Jack was actively working cases, as long as he was useful to us, we could provide protection. But when his health started failing, he had heart problems for years, I said quietly, remembering the prescription bottles, the doctor's appointments Jack had downplayed. He knew his time was limited. We offered to relocate both of you, give you new identities, but Jack refused. He said you'd built a life here, that you were happy, that he wouldn't uproot you for his mistakes. Jason looked directly at me. He loved you enough to keep you completely separate from his world, but that separation is what's putting you in danger now. What kind of danger? The last case Jack worked involved a man named Viktor Petrov, Russian national, very connected, very wealthy, very vindictive. We arrested Petrov and seized his assets based largely on intelligence Jack provided. Petrov was sentenced to 15 years, but his organization is still active. Gabriel's hand found mine across the table. What does that have to do with Helen? Petrov's people believe Jack kept copies of financial records, account numbers, client lists, information that could be very valuable to the right buyers, or very damaging to the wrong people. They've been patient, waiting for the heat to die down, but recently we've intercepted communications suggesting they're ready to move. Move how? They're coming to search Jack's known properties. His house, his workspace, anywhere he might have hidden backup files. Jason's eyes met mine. Mrs. Fuller, when was the last time you were inside that garage? 2 days ago. His face went pale. 2 days. Are you certain the filing cabinets were locked when you left? Gabriel tried the handles. They were definitely locked. Jason was already reaching for his phone. We need to get you both away from here. Now. Wait, I said, fear creeping up my spine. Why? What's wrong? Because if those cabinets were locked 2 days ago, and Petrov's people have been watching your house, they know you've discovered Jack's workspace, which means they think you've seen whatever Jack left behind. He stood, throwing money on the table, which means you're no longer just the uninformed widow, you're a potential threat. Through the diner window, I could see the black sedan Jason had arrived in, but now there was another car in the parking lot, a dark SUV with tinted windows that hadn't been there when we'd arrived. Gabriel, I whispered. That SUV, was it there before? Gabriel followed my gaze and his face went white. No, and look, there's someone sitting in the front seat. Jason glanced out the window and cursed under his breath. Back exit. Now, move casually, like you're going to the restroom. As we stood to leave, I caught a glimpse of the man in the SUV. He was watching the diner with the kind of focused attention that made my skin crawl. When his eyes met mine through the window, he reached for something on the seat beside him. We ran. The back exit of the Riverside Diner led to a narrow alley that smelled of grease and garbage. Jason's hand was firm on my shoulder, guiding me toward his sedan while Gabriel flanked my other side. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out everything except the crunch of gravel under our feet. Get in, Jason said, opening the back door. We need to move, now. As Gabriel and I slid into the back seat, I caught a glimpse of the diner's front parking lot through the gap between buildings. The dark SUV's doors were opening, two men in dark clothing stepping out with purpose. Jason started the engine and pulled out of the alley in the opposite direction, his movements controlled but urgent. Are they following us? He asked, checking his rearview mirror. Gabriel turned to look out the back window. I don't see them. Where are we going? Somewhere safe where we can talk without being interrupted. Jason's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. Mrs. Fuller, I need you to understand something. The fact that Petrov's people found us that quickly means they've been watching you longer than we thought. They may have already been inside your house, inside the garage. The thought of strangers in my home, going through Jack's hidden office, made me feel sick. What are they looking for exactly? Financial records, bank account numbers, client lists. When Jack worked for us, he was meticulous about documentation. Too meticulous, as it turned out. We thought he'd destroyed all his backup files when his health started failing, but he didn't, Gabriel finished. Jack was a careful man, paranoid, some might say. He believed in insurance policies. Jason turned onto a side road that led away from the main highway. The problem is, if those files still exist, and Petrov's people get their hands on them, they'll have access to financial information on dozens of criminal organizations we're still investigating. We drove in silence for several minutes, winding through residential neighborhoods I didn't recognize. Finally, Jason pulled into the parking lot of a small motel called the Pine Ridge Inn. It was the kind of place that rented rooms by the week and didn't ask too many questions. Room 237, Jason said, handing Gabriel a key. I checked us in this morning under false names. We'll be safe here for a few hours while we figure out our next move. The motel room was exactly what I'd expected. 2 double beds with faded floral bedspreads, wood-paneled walls, and the lingering smell of old cigarette smoke. Jason immediately went to the window and adjusted the blinds so he could see the parking lot. Okay, he said, turning to face us. We need to talk about what might be hidden in that garage, and where Jack might have put it. I sat on the edge of one of the beds, my hands shaking. I told you, there were filing cabinets, but they were all locked. Gabriel and I didn't actually get inside any of them. Jack wouldn't have left anything important in obvious filing cabinets, Jason said. He was too smart for that. Think, Mrs. Fuller. In the years you were married, did Jack ever give you anything for safekeeping? A safe deposit box key, maybe? A storage unit number? Some kind of code or password? I shook my head. Jack handled all of our important papers. He said it was simpler that way. Gabriel was pacing near the window. What about that business card Aunt Helen found? The one from Chicago with Ask for Zach written on it. Jason's head snapped up. You found a card for Zach Morrison? You know him? Zach Morrison runs a private security firm that specializes in data protection. Very exclusive, very expensive. If Jack was working with Zach, it means he was serious about hiding something valuable. Jason pulled out his phone. I need to make a call. While Jason stepped outside to use his phone, Gabriel sat beside me on the bed. Aunt Helen, are you okay? I know this is a lot to process. I laughed, but it came out more like a sob. My husband was a criminal who became an FBI informant. His real name was Jonathan, and now Russian mobsters are trying to kill me for information I don't even have. No, Gabriel, I'm not okay. He put his arm around my shoulders. We're going to figure this out. Whatever Uncle Jack, whatever Jonathan left behind, we'll find it before they do. Jason came back inside, his expression grim. I spoke with Zach Morrison. He confirmed that Jack rented a private data vault from his company about 6 months before he died. High security facility, biometric access only. Biometric access. Fingerprint scanner. But here's the problem, Jack's dead. We can't access the vault without him. Gabriel frowned. What about Helen? Could they have programmed it for her too? Not likely. Jack was very specific about keeping his work separate from his personal life. Jason paused, studying my face. Unless, Mrs. Fuller, did Jack ever take you to get fingerprinted for any reason? Employment background check, maybe. Volunteer work? I searched my memory. No, never. Wait, something flickered at the edge of my recollection. Actually, yes. About 8 months before he died, Jack said the library was requiring background checks for all employees' spouses who might have access to the building after hours. He took me to some office downtown to get fingerprinted. Jason and Gabriel exchanged looks. What library policy? Gabriel asked quietly. I felt the blood drain from my face. There was no policy, was there? Jack had your fingerprints added to the vault access system, Jason said. Which means you can get inside. Which means whatever Jack hid there, he intended for you to find it eventually. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Even in death, Jack was still manipulating my life, still pulling strings I couldn't see. He'd prepared for this moment, planned for the day when his secrets would catch up with us. Where is this vault? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Chicago, Jason said. We leave tonight. The drive to Chicago took 6 hours through increasingly heavy rain. Jason had insisted we leave immediately, taking only what we could carry and abandoning Gabriel's car at the motel. Petrov's people will be tracking license plates, he'd explained. We need to assume they know everything about your normal routines. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the highway blur past in the darkness, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 3 days. 3 days ago, I'd been a widow trying to sell her house. Now I was fleeing to Chicago in an FBI agent's car to access a secret data vault using fingerprints my dead husband had somehow obtained without my knowledge. Gabriel had fallen asleep in the back seat, exhausted by the constant adrenaline, but I couldn't sleep. Every set of headlights in the rearview mirror made my pulse spike. Every car that passed us on the highway could be carrying the men who wanted to kill me for information I didn't even know I possessed. Jason, I said quietly, not wanting to wake Gabriel, can I ask you something? Of course. When Jack was working for you, when he was providing information about these criminal organizations, was he in danger then? Jason was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the rain-slicked road. Yes, he said finally, constant danger. That's why we helped him create such an elaborate cover identity. The Jack Fuller you knew, the house on Maple Street, the job at Morrison Logistics, all of it was designed to make him invisible. But I wasn't invisible. I was right there with him. That was the problem. Jack fell in love with you, and love makes people take risks they normally wouldn't take. He should have maintained emotional distance, should have kept his cover identity temporary, but he didn't want to lose you. The weight of that statement settled over me. Jack had risked both our lives by choosing to build a real marriage within a false identity. How long did you know he was dying? About 18 months before it happened. His doctor contacted us when Jack was diagnosed with advanced heart disease. We offered to extract him then, give him medical care under federal protection, but he refused. He said he wanted to die as Jack Fuller, in the house he'd shared with you. Tears started down my cheeks before I realized I was crying. For the first time since discovering the garage, I felt the full weight of what Jack had sacrificed. He'd given up his chance at extended medical care, possibly years of life, to maintain the illusion that protected me. He really did love me, I whispered. More than his own life, Mrs. Fuller. Which is why we're going to honor his wishes and keep you safe. We reached the outskirts of Chicago around 2 a.m. The city looked different in the darkness and rain, more ominous, full of shadows where threats could hide. Jason navigated through empty streets to a commercial district where tall office buildings stood like silent sentinels against the storm. The building housing Zach Morrison's security firm was unremarkable from the outside, gray concrete and black glass, the kind of place you'd walk past without a second glance. But Jason had to use a special keycard to get us into the parking garage, and I noticed security cameras tracking our movement from the moment we entered the building. "Zach's expecting us," Jason said, as we rode the elevator to the 15th floor. "But Helen, I need you to be prepared for what we might find in that vault." Jack was methodical about documentation. If he kept records of his criminal activities from before he started working with us, "I'll see evidence that my husband was a criminal," I finished. "I understand. But I didn't understand. Not really. Nothing could have prepared me for what we found when the elevator doors opened." Zach Morrison was waiting for us in a reception area that looked more like a high-tech fortress than an office. Monitors lined the walls showing feeds from dozens of security cameras. The air hummed with the sound of powerful computers and climate control systems. "Mrs. Fuller," Zach said, rising from behind a desk that looked like it belonged on a spaceship. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of intense focus that suggested he'd spent his life working with dangerous secrets. "I'm sorry for your loss." Jack was a good man who found himself in an impossible situation. "Thank you," I managed, though the words felt inadequate. "The vault is through here," Zach said, leading us down a corridor lined with steel doors. "I should warn you, Jack's deposit is one of our most secure units. Whatever's inside, he considered it extremely valuable or extremely dangerous." We stopped in front of a door that looked like it belonged in a bank. Zach gestured to a biometric scanner mounted on the wall. "Your right index finger, Mrs. Fuller. Press firmly and hold steady." I approached the scanner with trembling hands. The red light turned green, and something deep within the wall clicked and whirred. The heavy door swung open with a soft hiss. Inside was a small room, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet, with metal shelving along 3 walls. But it wasn't filled with the financial records and client lists Jason had expected. Instead, the shelves held dozens of identical black binders, each labeled with dates going back 20 years. And on the small table in the center of the room sat a laptop computer and a handwritten note in Jack's familiar script. Gabriel picked up the note and read it aloud. "Helen, if you're reading this, it means my past has finally caught up with us. Everything you need to know is in these files, but please understand that some secrets are more dangerous than the truth." The laptop contains a video message explaining everything. Watch it first, then decide how much you really want to know. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you while I was alive. I was trying to protect you, but I realize now that ignorance isn't protection, it's just another kind of prison. I love you." I stared at the laptop, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no going back to the simple grief of a widow who'd lost her ordinary husband. Whatever Jonathan, had hidden in this vault would change everything I thought I knew about my life. But I was already past the point of no return. I'd been past it the moment I'd opened those garage doors. I reached for the laptop. The laptop screen flickered to life, and there he was. Jonathan, sitting in what looked like a hotel room I didn't recognize, wearing clothes I'd never seen. But it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They held a weight I'd never noticed in life, an exhaustion that went deeper than his heart condition. "Helen," he said, his voice exactly as I remembered, but somehow different, more vulnerable, more real. "If you're watching this, it means you've found the vault, and you're ready for the truth. I recorded this 6 months before I died, when I knew my time was running out, and the risks were becoming too great to ignore." Gabriel moved closer, his hand finding my shoulder as we watched my dead husband speak from beyond the grave. My real name is Jonathan David Kellerman. I was born in Detroit in 1962, and by the time I was 30, I was one of the most successful money launderers on the East Coast. Jonathan, paused, rubbing his face with hands that trembled slightly. I don't say that with pride, Helen. I say it because you need to understand what I was before I became the man you married. The room felt impossibly small. Zach had discreetly stepped outside, leaving Jason, Gabriel, and me alone with the ghost of my husband's confessions. I started small, washing money for local drug dealers, small-time criminals, but I was good at it, too good. Within 5 years, I was handling transactions for organized crime families, terrorist organizations, corrupt politicians. I moved hundreds of millions of dollars through offshore accounts, shell corporations, legitimate businesses that didn't know they were being used. I thought about our quiet Saturday mornings, Jack bringing me coffee in our sunny kitchen, discussing plans for the garden. How had this man, this criminal, managed to seem so ordinary, so peaceful? The work was lucrative but dangerous. I made enemies, people whose money I'd hidden so well that even they couldn't find it when they needed it quickly. By 1997, I had a target on my back and contracts out on my life. That's when the FBI approached me. Jason leaned forward, his expression grim. Even he seemed surprised by what he was hearing. Agent Sarah Winters, Jason's predecessor, offered me a choice: spend the rest of my life in federal prison, or help them dismantle the networks I'd helped build. It wasn't really a choice. I became an informant, but the work was more dangerous than prison would have been. Every day I was feeding information to the FBI, while pretending to still be loyal to criminals who would torture me to death if they discovered the truth. The Jonathan on the screen looked directly into the camera, directly at me. That's when I decided to disappear. With the FBI's help, I created Jack Fuller, a clean identity, a simple background, a man with no criminal connections and no dangerous enemies. The plan was to work undercover for 2 years, then disappear completely, live quietly somewhere remote. He smiled then, and it was the smile I remembered from our first meeting at the bookstore. But then I met you, Helen, and for the first time in my adult life, I wanted to be the person my identity claimed I was. I wanted to be Jack Fuller, logistics coordinator, motorcycle enthusiast, devoted husband. Tears were streaming down my face, but I couldn't look away. I know what you're thinking, that our entire marriage was built on a lie. But that's not true. The man who loved you, who brought you coffee every morning, who held you when you cried about your father's death, that man was real. Jack Fuller might have been a false identity, but my love for you wasn't false. Gabriel squeezed my shoulder. Aunt Helen, the problem, Jonathan continued, was that my past never stopped being dangerous. Even as Jack Fuller, even in our quiet life on Maple Street, I was still gathering intelligence for the FBI, still documenting criminal activities, still making enemies who wouldn't forget or forgive. The image on the screen shifted slightly as Jonathan leaned closer to the camera. 3 years ago, we thought we'd finally caught the biggest fish, Viktor Petrov and his organization. The evidence I provided led to raids in 12 countries, hundreds of arrests, the seizure of over $2 billion in criminal assets. We thought it was over. Jason muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. But Petrov had contingencies we didn't know about. People loyal to him who escaped the raids. And Helen, they've been waiting, watching, planning. They know that I kept detailed records of everything, not just Petrov's operations, but dozens of other criminal enterprises. They want those records. The camera angle shifted, and I could see papers scattered across the hotel room table behind Jonathan. Charts, photographs, financial documents, the same type of materials we'd found in the garage. The files in this vault contain evidence that could destroy criminal organizations across 3 continents. Bank account numbers, real names behind false identities, details of murders, drug trafficking, arms dealing, everything I documented during 15 years of undercover work. I felt sick. My husband hadn't just been hiding his criminal past from me, he'd been hiding an ongoing war. I thought about destroying it all, Helen, just burning everything and trying to give us a normal life. But too many innocent people would die if these criminals continue operating. The information I gathered could save thousands of lives. Jonathan's image wavered as my tears blurred my vision. So I made a choice. I kept the records, but I made sure that if something happened to me, they would end up in the hands of someone I trusted completely, someone who would know what to do with them. He looked directly into the camera again. Someone like you, Helen, because in 18 years of marriage, you never once compromised your principles, even when it would have been easier. You never looked the other way when something was wrong. The video paused, and I realized I'd been holding my breath. When it resumed, Jonathan's expression had changed. He looked older, more tired, but also more determined. What I'm about to tell you next will be the hardest part. It's about how I'm going to die, and why. The video continued, and Jonathan's face filled the screen with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of determination and profound sadness. Helen, my heart condition was real, but the heart attack that killed me wasn't entirely natural. He paused, letting the words sink in. 6 months before I died, we intercepted communications indicating that Petrov's organization had discovered my real identity. They knew Jonathan Kellerman had become Jack Fuller. They knew where I lived, where you worked, what our daily routines were. I felt Gabriel's hand tighten on my shoulder. Jason had gone completely still beside us. The FBI wanted to extract us immediately. New identities, witness protection, the whole program. But Helen, you'd just been promoted to head librarian. You were finally doing the work you dreamed about since college. Your sister Genevieve had just moved back to town with her kids. Your whole life was rooted in that place, and I couldn't bear to tear you away from everything you loved. On screen, Jonathan reached for something off camera and held up a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. So I made a different choice. Dr. Marcus Chen, a chemist who owed me favors from the old days, provided me with this digitoxin. In small doses, it's a heart medication. In larger doses, it causes cardiac arrest that's virtually undetectable in autopsy. The room spun around me. I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. I planned my own death, Helen. I chose the time, the place, even the dose. The heart attack that killed me happened at work because I knew paramedics would be called immediately, that you wouldn't have to find my body. I timed it for a Wednesday because I knew you had book club that evening. I wanted you to have friends around you when you got the news. Gabriel made a strangled sound beside me. Jesus Christ, Uncle Jack. I know how this sounds, Jonathan continued on the screen. I know it seems like the ultimate betrayal, choosing death over trust, choosing to leave you rather than fight for us. But Helen, they weren't just threatening to kill me, they were threatening to kill you. And I'd seen what Petrov's people do to the families of their enemies. Jason finally spoke, his voice hoarse. We never knew. Jack told us his condition had worsened naturally. He never said anything about suicide. On the laptop screen, Jonathan set down the vial and leaned forward. The official cause of death would be listed as cardiac arrest due to pre-existing heart disease. No investigation, no suspicion, just a grieving widow burying her ordinary husband. I thought it would end there. I thought my death would close the book on Jonathan Kellerman's crimes and let you live safely as Jack Fuller's widow. The screen flickered slightly, and when it stabilized, Jonathan looked older, more haggard. But I was wrong. 3 weeks after I recorded this message, we learned that Petrov's organization had been planning something much more sophisticated than simple revenge. They weren't just after me, they were after the information I'd gathered during 15 years of undercover work. He gestured to something off camera, and the view shifted to show the hotel room table covered with documents. These files contain evidence of criminal activities worth billions of dollars. Bank account numbers for terrorist organizations, real names of undercover operatives working in dozens of countries, details of planned attacks, assassinations, major drug shipments. I stared at the screen, trying to process the magnitude of what Jack had been hiding. If this information fell into the wrong hands, thousands of people would die, Jason finished grimly. Intelligence operations would be compromised. Criminal organizations would know exactly which of their members were actually government agents. Jonathan's image returned to the center of the screen. I realized that my death wouldn't end this. If anything, it would make the situation worse. Petrov's people would assume I'd hidden the information somewhere they could find it. They'd tear apart our house, search every property I'd ever owned, interrogate anyone who'd ever known me. He looked directly into the camera, directly at me, including you, Helen. They'd assume I'd told you something, given you some clue about where the files were hidden, and they'd do whatever it took to extract that information from you. My mouth went dry, but I didn't know anything, which would make the interrogation longer and more brutal, Jonathan said, as if he could hear my thoughts across time. They'd never believe you were truly ignorant, so I had to create a different scenario, one where you would have the information they wanted, but only after my death. The camera angle shifted again, and I could see Jonathan more clearly. He looked exhausted, defeated, but also grimly determined. Everything I've done, the fake job, the secret garage, the elaborate financial records, even adding your fingerprints to this vault, it was all designed to create a trail you could follow. Not immediately, not while the heat was highest, but eventually. When you were forced to sell the house, when you had to clean out my things, when you discovered the garage. Gabriel shook his head in disbelief. He planned for Helen to find everything. The goal was to make it look like I'd hidden information from you during our marriage, but left clues for you to discover after my death. That way, when Petrov's people came looking, you'd have something to give them, not the real files, but enough breadcrumbs to satisfy them that you'd found what they were seeking. Jonathan paused, his expression growing even more serious. But Helen, I need you to understand something crucial. The information in this vault isn't the breadcrumbs, this is the real thing. The evidence that could destroy criminal organizations across 3 continents. The screen went dark for a moment, then flickered back to life, showing Jonathan holding a thick manila envelope. I've prepared 2 sets of documents. One set contains false information, convincing but ultimately worthless intelligence, that would satisfy Petrov's people, without actually compromising any ongoing operations. That set is hidden in the garage, in a safe behind the water heater that you'll find when you look carefully. My head was spinning. Even in death, Jonathan was still 3 moves ahead of everyone else. But this vault contains the real intelligence. And Helen, I'm putting an impossible choice in your hands. You can take the false documents from the garage, give them to Petrov's people, and live safely with the lie. Or you can use the real intelligence to help the FBI destroy these criminal networks once and for all. Jonathan's image paused, and I realized he was giving me time to absorb what he'd just said. If you choose the first option, innocent people will continue to die, but you'll be safe. If you choose the second option, you'll help save thousands of lives, but you'll be putting yourself in more danger than I ever wanted you to face. The video ended abruptly, leaving the 3 of us staring at a black screen in stunned silence. The silence in the vault stretched on for what felt like hours. I stared at the black laptop screen, my mind reeling from Jonathan's final revelation. Gabriel stood frozen beside me, his face pale. Jason was the first to speak. Mrs. Fuller, I need to call my superiors immediately. Modern cell phones can be tracked even when they're turned off, Zach said, without looking away from his monitors. If they had access to your phone number and the right technology, they've been following us since we left home. I finished. The reality sinking in. One of the monitors flickered to a different view, the building's main lobby. 2 men in expensive suits were speaking with the night security guard. Even from the grainy surveillance footage, I could see the guard's posture change from casual to terrified. They're not coming up guns blazing, Gabriel observed. They're trying to get access legitimately, Zach nodded. Which means they want to avoid attention. Good for us. It gives us time to think. Jason was already on his phone, speaking in rapid, clipped sentences to someone at the FBI. When he hung up, his expression was even more serious. Backup is 20 minutes away, but that guard isn't going to hold them off for long. As if summoned by his words, the monitor showing the lobby revealed the security guard reluctantly leading the 2 suited men toward the elevator bank. Okay, Zach said, standing up from his console. Emergency protocols. We have a secure room on the 19th floor with independent communications. We can hold out there until another electronic beep interrupted him, but this one was different, sharper, more urgent. A red light began flashing on one of his control panels. What's that? I asked. Zach's face went white. Someone just accessed the building's emergency systems. They're overriding the elevator controls. His fingers flew over the keyboard, And they're disabling the fire suppression system on our floor. Gabriel grabbed my arm. Why would they disable fire suppression? The answer came to me with horrible clarity. Because they're going to force us out. Smoke us out, literally. Jason was already moving. We need to go. Now. Is there another way off this floor? Service stairwell at the north end of the building, Zach said, gathering equipment into a small bag. But if they're as professional as they appear, they'll have people stationed there too. As we moved toward the door, another monitor caught my attention. It showed a view of the garage I hadn't seen before, and there was a fourth vehicle, a white van with no windows and communication equipment mounted on its roof. Zach, I said, pointing at the screen. What's in that van? He looked where I was pointing and cursed. Signal intelligence equipment. They're not just here to grab you and leave, Mrs. Fuller. They're here to interrogate you. That van is a mobile interrogation unit. The implication hit me like a sledgehammer. These people weren't planning to take me somewhere else for questioning. They were going to do it right here, in the parking garage, using equipment designed to extract information through whatever means necessary. The files, Gabriel said suddenly. They know she's been in the vault. They're going to assume she's seen everything. Jason checked his weapon and looked at each of us in turn, which means they're not going to be satisfied with denials. They'll keep going until they get answers, or until there's nothing left to question, Zach added grimly. We'd reached the stairwell door when another sound stopped us. Footsteps in the corridor behind us, coming from the direction of the elevators. Too many footsteps, moving too quickly to be friendly. They're already on this floor, Jason whispered. Through the small window in the stairwell door, I could see more men positioned on the landing below us. We were trapped between two groups of armed professionals who believed I had information worth torturing me to obtain. But as I stood there, surrounded by the evidence of my husband's double life and the people willing to kill for his secrets, something unexpected happened. Instead of terror, I felt a surge of anger. Jonathan had planned for this moment. He'd prepared me for exactly this situation, even if I hadn't understood it at the time. The false documents in the garage, the real intelligence in the vault, the elaborate trail of clues, it had all been leading to this confrontation, and suddenly, I realized what I had to do. Jason, I said quietly, do you have a way to contact the people in the garage directly? He frowned. Possibly. Why? I looked at the laptop bag Zach was carrying, knowing it contained copies of Jonathan's files. Because I think it's time to give them what they want. Helen, no, Gabriel said immediately. You can't trust them. I'm not talking about trusting them, I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. I'm talking about outsmarting them. Jonathan didn't just leave me evidence, he left me a weapon. The footsteps in the corridor were getting closer, and I think it's time to use it. Jason stared at me as if I'd lost my mind. Helen, these people aren't here to negotiate, they're here to extract information by any means necessary. I know, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But Jonathan didn't just leave me evidence, he left me leverage. I looked at Zach. Can you patch me through to their communications? Zach hesitated, glancing between Jason and me. Theoretically, yes, but do it, I said firmly. I want to talk to whoever's in charge down there. The footsteps in the corridor were getting closer. Jason held up a hand, signaling for silence, then positioned himself at the stairwell door with his weapon drawn. Gabriel moved protectively closer to me, but I stepped away from both of them. Zach, I need you to understand something, I said quietly. Those files in the vault, they don't just contain evidence of criminal activity. They contain the real names and locations of undercover federal agents working in criminal organizations around the world. Jason's head snapped toward me. What? Jonathan mentioned it in the video. If Petrov's people get their hands on that information, they won't just be able to continue their criminal activities, they'll be able to identify and eliminate every federal agent working against them. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. This wasn't just about protecting me, or even about stopping one criminal organization. This was about protecting hundreds of active federal agents whose covers would be blown the moment those files were compromised. Zach, I continued, patch me through to them. Now, his fingers flew over the keyboard. You'll be speaking through the building's PA system. They'll hear you, but they won't be able to trace the signal to determine exactly where you are in the building. A few seconds later, he nodded. You're live. I took a deep breath, thinking about everything Jonathan had taught me through 18 years of marriage. Not just the lies, but the truths. How to read people, how to find their pressure points, how to turn their own expectations against them. This is Helen Fuller, I said, my voice echoing through the speakers. I know who you are, and why you're here. I also know what you're looking for. There was a pause, then a voice crackled through the building's communication system, accented, professional, cold. Mrs. Fuller. My name is Dmitry Volkov. I represent certain interested parties who believe your late husband possessed information that belongs to them. Jonathan kept records of everything, I replied. Bank accounts, financial transactions, personal details of your organization's members. I've seen them. Excellent. Then you understand the importance of returning what was stolen. I looked at Jason, who was listening intently while keeping watch on the corridor. I understand that you're willing to kill for it, but I also understand something you don't. And what is that, Mrs. Fuller? Those records contain more than just your organization's information. They contain intelligence on dozens of criminal groups, terrorist organizations, and government agencies. If I release them publicly, your enemies will learn everything Jonathan discovered about your operations. There was a longer pause this time. When Volkov spoke again, his tone was more cautious. What are you proposing? A trade. I give you the specific files related to your organization, and you leave me alone. Permanently. And how do we verify that you're not keeping copies? I smiled, even though he couldn't see me. Because I'm going to prove it to you right now. I nodded to Zach, who pulled up a secure internet connection on his system. I'm uploading a sample of Jonathan's files to a public server, I said. Check your encrypted communication system. You should be receiving a link in about 30 seconds. Zach's fingers flew over his keyboard, uploading carefully selected portions of the false documents Jonathan had prepared. Enough to look authentic, but nothing that would compromise real operations. The silence stretched on for almost a minute. Then Volkov's voice returned, and for the first time, it carried a note of genuine concern. Mrs. Fuller, where did you obtain these files? From the vault your husband left for me. The question is, how many more do I have, and how long before I decide to release them all? Gabriel grabbed my arm. Helen, what are you doing? What Jonathan trained me to do, I whispered back. I'm controlling the narrative. Volkov's voice crackled through the speakers again. You have our attention, Mrs. Fuller, but you should understand that we have yours as well. My associates are currently positioned throughout this building. Your FBI friend's backup is still 15 minutes away. Then you'd better listen carefully, I replied, because I'm about to explain how this is going to work. I gestured to Zach, who brought up a new screen showing multiple file directories, some real, some carefully constructed fakes. I have copies of these files stored in 12 different locations, electronic copies, physical copies, and instructions for their automatic release if anything happens to me. If I don't check in with my security service every 24 hours, everything goes public. Bank accounts, real names, operational details, the locations of safe houses, everything. It was a complete bluff, but it was the kind of bluff Jonathan would have prepared. The kind of insurance policy a man like him would have created. However, I continued, I'm willing to make a deal. I'll give you the files specific to your organization, along with all backup copies, in exchange for a guarantee of safety for myself and my family. What kind of guarantee? The same kind Jonathan had. I disappear, new identity, new location, and your people never look for me again. In return, your secrets stay secret. There was another pause, then voices in the background speaking rapidly in Russian. Finally, Volkov came back on the line. You would need to provide proof that you have these files, and that you're capable of releasing them publicly. Check your secure email in 5 minutes, I said, nodding to Zach again. You'll receive a complete list of your organization's financial assets that Jonathan documented over the past 3 years. If that doesn't convince you I have everything, nothing will. As Zach worked to compile and send the information, Jason moved closer to me. Helen, You realize you're painting a bigger target on yourself, right? Even if this works, even if they agree to let you disappear, there's no guarantee they'll honor the agreement. I know, I said quietly. But Jonathan left me two choices: live in fear forever, or take control of the situation. I'm choosing control. The communication system crackled to life again. Mrs. Fuller, we've received your email. We're prepared to discuss terms. I smiled grimly. Good. Because I have a few more conditions you're going to want to hear. The building's communication system remained silent for nearly 3 minutes. I could hear Volkov speaking rapidly to someone in Russian, his voice growing more agitated. Gabriel stood close beside me, while Jason kept his weapon trained on the corridor door. Zach monitored multiple screens, tracking the movements of armed men throughout the building. When Volkov's voice finally returned, it carried a new edge of respect and wariness. Mrs. Fuller, you've presented us with complications. The information you've shared indicates your husband was more thorough than we anticipated. Jonathan was always thorough, I replied, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. The question is whether you're prepared to be reasonable. Before we discuss terms, I need you to understand something. My organization is not the only party interested in your husband's files. There are others who believe they have prior claims to this information. Jason's head snapped up. He gestured frantically for Zach to trace the communication signal. Something in Volkov's tone had changed. He sounded almost warning me. What others? I asked. Your husband worked with many organizations during his career, Mrs. Fuller. Some of them were less legitimate than the FBI, and some of them have longer memories than you might prefer. The screens around us suddenly flickered, and new vehicles appeared on the parking garage monitors. 2 more black SUVs had arrived, but these weren't positioning themselves with Volkov's team. Instead, they were taking strategic positions that seemed designed to contain the first group. Jason whispered urgently, "Who are the new arrivals?" Zach's fingers flew over his keyboard, accessing city traffic cameras and running license plate checks. The plates are registered to a shell company owned by, oh, hell. It's registered to Meridian Consulting Services. My blood ran cold. That's the company that was paying Jonathan's fake salary. Jason was already on his phone again, speaking in rapid, coded phrases to his FBI contacts. When he disconnected, his expression was grim. Mrs. Fuller, Volkov's voice crackled through the speakers again. I'm afraid our conversation has become more urgent. It appears we have mutual concerns about the new arrivals. Who are they? I demanded. Associates of a man named Chen Nakamura. He ran one of the larger money laundering operations your husband infiltrated. Chen has been in federal prison for 2 years, but his organization remained active. They've been searching for your husband's records longer than anyone. Gabriel grabbed my arm. Helen, we need to get out of here, now. But even as he spoke, more vehicles appeared on the monitors. Police cars, unmarked federal vehicles, and what looked like a SWAT transport van. The parking garage was turning into a war zone. Mrs. Fuller, Volkov continued, his voice now clearly stressed, Chen's people don't negotiate. They don't make deals. They eliminate threats and take what they want. My suggestion is that we conclude our business quickly, before they decide to involve themselves directly. Jason finished his phone call and turned to me. FBI tactical units are 3 minutes out, but that may not be fast enough. These new arrivals, Nakamura's people, they have a reputation for not leaving witnesses. I stared at the monitors showing armed men positioning themselves throughout the building. What had started as a negotiation with one criminal organization had escalated into a 3-way confrontation involving Russian crime families, Asian money laundering operations, and federal law enforcement. Zach, I said, my mind racing, can you isolate the building's systems, lock down everything? I can trigger emergency protocols, he replied, but that would trap us in here with everyone else. That's exactly what I want. I turned back to the communication system. Mr. Volkov, I'm going to make you an offer you won't refuse. I'm listening. Jonathan's files don't just contain information about your organization and Nakamura's. They contain detailed intelligence on at least 15 major criminal enterprises worldwide. bank accounts, safe house locations. The real names of everyone from money launderers, to arms dealers, to human traffickers. The building shuddered slightly as someone, probably Nakamura's people, attempted to breach one of the secured entrances. I'm going to lock down this building, I continued. Complete isolation. No one gets in, no one gets out, until I decide what to do with this information. The FBI will be here in 2 minutes. Nakamura's people are already moving, and you're caught in the middle. What are you proposing? A new kind of deal. I give all of you what you actually need. Not everything Jonathan collected, but the specific intelligence that threatens your operations. In return, you all work together to ensure I survive the next hour. Gabriel looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Helen, you're asking criminals to protect you from other criminals. No, I said, understanding Jonathan's strategy with sudden clarity. I'm giving them a reason to protect themselves. Because if this building becomes a battlefield, and I don't survive, those files get released automatically. Everyone loses. Volkov's voice was quiet when he responded. You're suggesting a temporary alliance. I'm suggesting mutual survival. Your people, Nakamura's people, and the FBI all want the same thing: to contain the damage from Jonathan's intelligence gathering. The only way that happens is if everyone walks away from this alive. Zach looked up from his monitors. Helen, I'm reading massive electronic interference. Someone's jamming communications, probably trying to prevent FBI coordination. Then we need to move fast, I said. Mr. Volkov, do you have a way to contact Nakamura's people directly? Possibly. But Mrs. Fuller, you should understand that what you're proposing is extremely dangerous. These are not people who honor agreements. Neither was my husband, apparently, and he managed to stay alive for 15 years. I took a deep breath. Zach, initiate lockdown protocols. Full isolation. Helen, no, Jason said sharply. If you lock us in here with these people, then everyone has the same incentive to find a peaceful solution, I finished. Because the alternative is that we all die together. Zach's hand hovered over his keyboard. Are you sure about this? I thought about Jonathan's video message, his careful planning, his belief that sometimes the most dangerous option was the only viable one. Do it. Alarms began blaring throughout the building as security barriers slammed down over windows and reinforced doors sealed shut. The ventilation system shifted to internal recycling, and backup power systems activated. On the monitors, I could see confusion among all 3 groups as they realized what had happened. We were all trapped together, criminals, federal agents and me, in a high-security building with no way out. Volkov's voice crackled through the speakers one more time, but now it carried something approaching admiration. Very well, Mrs. Fuller, you have our attention. Now what? The building's silence stretched on for several minutes after the lockdown initiated. Through the monitors, I could see the 3 groups of armed men reassessing their positions, trapped in a high-security facility, with no immediate way out. It was Zach who broke the silence, his voice tight with alarm. Helen, we have a problem. I'm detecting an unauthorized override attempt on the lockdown system. I moved to look over his shoulder at the monitors. From outside, no, from inside the building, someone else has administrative access to the security systems. His fingers flew over the keyboard. This shouldn't be possible unless... The screens flickered, and suddenly we were looking at a new camera feed, one that showed the building's main security office. A woman in an expensive business suit was seated at the primary control console, her fingers moving confidently over the keyboard. She was older, maybe 60, with silver hair, and the kind of composed demeanor that suggested she was accustomed to high-stress situations. Who is that? Gabriel asked. But I knew. Even before she looked up at the camera with a slight smile, I knew exactly who she was. Hello, Helen, said my sister Genevieve. Her voice came through the building's communication system with crystal clarity. I was wondering when you'd finally get yourself into trouble too big to handle alone. The world tilted around me. My sister, my older sister who'd moved back to town 3 years ago to be closer to family, who'd been supportive after Jack's death, who'd helped me with funeral arrangements, was sitting in the security office of a building currently under siege by 3 different criminal organizations. Genevieve? I whispered, though I knew she could hear me. What are you doing here? She stood up from the console, and for the first time I noticed she wasn't alone. A man in a dark suit stood behind her, Asian, well-dressed, with the kind of alert posture that suggested military or security training. "I'm cleaning up a mess that should have been resolved 3 years ago," she said calmly. "Helen, I need you to understand something. Jonathan's death didn't end anything. It just postponed the inevitable." Jason was already moving, checking the corridor door, and speaking rapidly into his radio, but I couldn't process what he was saying. All I could focus on was my sister's face on the monitor, composed, in control, completely unruffled by the armed standoff happening around her. "I don't understand," I said. "I know you don't." That was the point. Genevieve moved closer to the camera. "Helen, Jonathan wasn't the only one with secrets. He wasn't the only one with a double life." The man behind her stepped forward, and Genevieve gestured toward him. "This is Kenji Nakamura, Chen's nephew and current head of their organization. We've been working together for quite some time." Gabriel grabbed my arm. "Aunt Helen, that means your sister has been in contact with people who want you dead," Jason finished grimly. "Helen, we need to get out of this room, now." But I couldn't move. I was staring at my sister, the woman who'd held my hand at Jack's funeral, who'd helped me go through his belongings, who'd encouraged me to sell the house and start fresh. "How long?" I asked. Genevieve's expression softened slightly. "Helen, please understand that I never wanted you to get hurt. Everything I did was designed to keep you safe and ignorant." "How long have you been working with them?" "Since before Jonathan died, since before he even got sick." She paused, and for a moment, I saw something that looked almost like regret cross her face. "Helen, who do you think told Petrov's people where to find Jonathan in the first place?" The words hit me like a physical blow. I gripped the edge of Zach's console to keep from falling. "You?" Gabriel's voice was barely above a whisper. "You're the reason Uncle Jack is dead?" "Jonathan was dying anyway," Genevieve said defensively. "His heart condition was real, Helen. I just accelerated the timeline." "You killed him." I couldn't believe I was saying the words. "You killed my husband. I facilitated his death to prevent something much worse from happening to you." Jonathan had become a liability. The FBI couldn't protect him anymore, and too many people wanted him dead. If I hadn't acted when I did, Petrov's people would have taken both of you. They would have tortured you for information you didn't have. Zach was frantically working at his console. "The override is coming from the security office. She has full control of the building's systems. She can unlock any door, disable any security measure, including the lockdown I just initiated," I realized. "Including the lockdown," Genevieve confirmed. "Helen, I'm going to open the security barriers in 60 seconds. When I do, you're going to come down to the main lobby with Mr. Morrison's laptop containing Jonathan's files. No FBI agents, no backup, just you. And if I refuse," Kenji Nakamura stepped closer to the camera. When he spoke, his English was perfect, unaccented. "Mrs. Fuller, your sister has been protecting you for 3 years, but that protection has a price. You can pay it willingly, or we can extract it by other means." "What other means?" Genevieve's face appeared on the screen again. "Helen, I know about Louise." My blood went cold. Louise was Gabriel's younger sister, my niece. She was 22, just graduated from college, working as a teacher in Portland. "What about Louise?" "She's not in Portland anymore, Helen. She's been our guest for the past 48 hours, alive, unharmed, but very much dependent on your cooperation." Gabriel made a sound like a wounded animal. "You took my sister, your own niece?" "I protected her," Genevieve said firmly, "just like I've been protecting Helen. But protection requires cooperation." I stared at the monitor, trying to reconcile the woman I was seeing with the sister I'd known my entire life. "Who are you, Genevieve? I mean, who are you really?" She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't the warm, familiar smile I remembered. It was cold, calculating, professional. "I'm someone who's been cleaning up other people's messes for a very long time, Helen. Jonathan wasn't the only person in your life with a complicated past." The screens around us began flashing as security barriers started retracting throughout the building. 60 seconds, Helen," Genevieve said. "Main lobby, come alone, or Louise pays the price for your husband's poor choices." The communication cut out, leaving us in shocked silence as the building's security systems systematically unlocked around us. Gabriel was shaking. She has Louise, my sister. I looked at the laptop containing Jonathan's files, then at Jason, who was speaking urgently into his radio, then at Gabriel, whose world had just collapsed the same way mine had 3 days ago. Helen, Jason said, you can't trust her, even if you give her what she wants. She's my sister, I interrupted, though the words felt strange in my mouth. She was at Jack's funeral, she helped me plan the service. She brought me soup when I was sick last winter, and she's been working with the people who killed him, Gabriel said quietly. Aunt Helen, whoever that woman is, she's not the sister you thought you knew. Through the monitors, I could see armed men moving through the building, the 3 groups slowly converging on the main lobby. In the center of it all, my sister waited with the man who'd ordered my husband's death. I picked up the laptop containing 20 years of criminal intelligence. I'm going down there, I said. Helen, no, Gabriel. They have Louise. My sister, whatever she's become, they have your sister. I looked at him with tears in my eyes. I won't let anyone else die because of Jonathan's secrets. Wait, Jason said sharply, grabbing my arm as I headed toward the door. Helen, you can't just walk down there. This is exactly what they want. You isolated, vulnerable, with no backup. They have Louise, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. My niece is 22 years old, Jason. She doesn't deserve to die because of choices Jonathan made before she was even born. Gabriel was pacing frantically near the monitors. There has to be another way. Aunt Helen, if you go down there, they'll kill you the moment they have those files. Zach looked up from his console. Actually, they might not. Both Jason and I turned to him. What do you mean? I've been monitoring their communications while you were talking to your sister. The 3 groups down there, they're not working together as smoothly as they're pretending. Volkov's people are nervous about Nakamura's organization. Nakamura's people don't trust the FBI agents who just arrived, and nobody trusts your sister. He pulled up multiple audio feeds on his screens. Listen to this. Volkov's voice came through clearly. This was not the arrangement, Genevieve. You said the woman would cooperate quietly. Now we have federal agents, building lockdowns, and complications we didn't plan for. Another voice, Kenji Nakamura's, responded. Perhaps it's time to consider that your arrangement with Mrs. Simmons has outlived its usefulness. My sister's reply was sharp. My arrangement has kept this situation contained for 3 years. If you had followed my advice from the beginning. Zach cut off the audio. They're starting to turn on each other. Your sister may have orchestrated this meeting, but she's losing control of it. Jason was studying the building schematics on one of the monitors. Helen, what if we don't give them what they expect? What do you mean? Your sister is counting on you being the same person who's been grieving quietly for 3 years. But you're not that person anymore, are you? I thought about everything that had happened since I'd opened the garage doors. The shocked widow who'd discovered her husband's secret office was gone. In her place was someone who'd learned to negotiate with criminals, manipulate dangerous situations, and make life or death decisions under pressure. No, I said slowly. I'm not that person anymore. Gabriel stopped pacing. What are you thinking? I'm thinking Jonathan didn't just leave me evidence and false documents. He left me something else. I looked at Zach. Can you create a communications link that only connects to the FBI agents in the building? Cut out the criminal organizations entirely. Easily. Why? Because Jason's right. My sister is expecting the old Helen to walk down there and hand over the files to save Louise. But what if instead, the new Helen walks down there with a completely different plan? Jason's expression shifted from concern to interest. What kind of plan? I moved to Zach's console and began pulling up the building schematics. Jonathan spent 15 years playing multiple sides against each other. He survived by making sure no one ever had complete information. What if we do the same thing? Helen, Gabriel said cautiously, what exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing we give each group exactly what they think they want, while making sure none of them get what they actually need. I looked at the 3 men around me, an FBI agent, a security expert, and my nephew who worked in tech. and I'm proposing we do it together. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had real allies. Not people who were protecting me or manipulating me, but people who were choosing to work with me. Zach, can you selectively unlock parts of the building while keeping others sealed? Absolutely. Jason, how many FBI agents are in the building, and can you coordinate with them without the criminals knowing? 6 agents, and yes. I turned to Gabriel. Are you with me? He nodded grimly. Louise is my sister too. What do you need me to do? Here's what we're going to do, I said, my voice steady as I outlined the plan. Zach, you're going to create 3 separate communication channels, one for each group in the lobby. They'll think they're getting private information, but we'll be feeding each of them different versions of the truth. Zach's fingers flew over his keyboard. Done. What kind of different versions? Jonathan taught me that the best lies are mostly truth with one crucial deception. I pulled up the files on the laptop. Volkov's people want their financial records to disappear. Nakamura's organization wants to know which of their members might be undercover agents. My sister wants to contain the situation and protect her own position. Jason leaned forward. So we give each of them what they think they want. Exactly. But we make sure that getting what they want puts them in conflict with each other. I looked at Gabriel. Can you help Zach create fake file transfers? Things that look like I'm sending sensitive information but are actually just decoy data. Absolutely. I can make it look like you're downloading terabytes of information while actually sending them grocery lists. Perfect. I turned to Jason. How quickly can your team position themselves around the lobby without being detected? They're already moving. But Helen, even with backup, if this goes wrong, Louise dies anyway, I interrupted. At least this way we're fighting back. Zach looked up from his console. Communications established. Each group thinks they have a private channel to this room. What's the first move? I took a deep breath, thinking about how Jonathan would have handled this situation. Multiple players, conflicting interests, everyone believing they had the upper hand. First, we make them all think they're winning. I activated the channel to Volkov's team. Mr. Volkov, I'm prepared to transfer the files related to your organization, but I need proof that my niece is safe first. Almost immediately, Volkov's voice responded, Mrs. Fuller, we appreciate your cooperation. However, we're concerned about the other parties present. This would go more smoothly if we could eliminate some of the complications. Perfect. He was already thinking about turning on the others. I switched to Nakamura's channel. Mr. Nakamura, I have information you need about potential FBI infiltration in your organization, but I need assurance that my family will be protected from Volkov's people. They're not as reasonable as you are. Nakamura's response was immediate. Mrs. Fuller, we've been monitoring Volkov's communications. His people are planning to eliminate witnesses once they have what they want. Perhaps we should discuss mutual protection. Even better. Now I activated my sister's private channel. Genevieve, I know you think you're in control, but you need to understand, both criminal organizations down there are planning to double-cross you. I've intercepted their communications. They don't intend to honor any agreements. There was a pause before Genevieve's voice came through, and for the first time, she sounded uncertain. Helen, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that you're about to become a liability to people who don't leave liabilities alive. Volkov's people think you know too much, and Nakamura's organization doesn't trust you because you're not one of them. Gabriel was watching the monitors, tracking the positions of all the armed men in the lobby. Aunt Helen, they're starting to spread out. It looks like they're taking defensive positions against each other. Good. That means they're listening to what we're telling them. I looked at Jason. Are your people ready, in position and waiting for your signal? I stared at the monitors showing the lobby, where my sister stood between 2 groups of criminals who were beginning to eye each other suspiciously. For 3 years, she'd been orchestrating events from the shadows, manipulating everyone around her. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how much I'd learned from living with Jonathan's secrets. Zach, are you ready to release the files? Which files? I smiled, feeling more like Jonathan than I ever had before. All of them. The real ones, but not to the people in the lobby. Then to who? To every major news organization, every law enforcement agency, and every government intelligence service on Jonathan's contact list, all at once. Jason's eyes widened. Helen, if I do that, none of the people in the lobby will have any reason to keep Louise alive for leverage, because the information they're trying to control will already be public. Gabriel grabbed my arm. That's incredibly dangerous. Yes, it is, but it's also the only way to ensure that this ends today. No more hiding, no more manipulation, no more people dying for secrets. I looked at each of them. Jonathan spent 15 years playing games with dangerous people. I'm going to end those games permanently. I reached for the activation key that would release everything Jonathan had collected over his career. Helen, Genevieve's voice crackled through the speakers. What are you doing up there? I'm finishing what you started, sister, I replied. I'm ending this. My finger hovered over the release key when Zach's monitors suddenly erupted with new alerts. Helen, wait, I'm picking up an incoming transmission, encrypted, high priority. It's not coming from anyone in the building. Who is it? I'm not sure. The encryption is military grade, but the signal is coming from. He paused, his face going pale. It's coming from the garage at your house. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. There's no transmission equipment in the garage. Actually, a familiar voice came through the speakers, causing everyone in the room to freeze. There is. It was Jack's voice. Not Jonathan's confession from the video we'd watched hours ago, but his voice as I'd known it for 18 years. Calm, methodical, patient. Helen, if you're hearing this message, it means you've made it to the vault. You've seen my confession, and you're about to make a decision that will change everything. But before you do, there's one more truth you need to know. Gabriel grabbed my arm. That's impossible. Uncle Jack is dead. We buried him 3 years ago. The voice continued. I'm recording this message in real time, Helen. I'm alive, and I'm in the garage where this all started. My legs gave out. I collapsed into Zach's chair, staring at the speakers as if they could somehow show me proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The heart attack was staged, just as I explained in the video, but the digitoxin I used doesn't always kill. Sometimes it just simulates death so convincingly that even medical professionals can't detect life signs. I had Dr. Chen prepare a specific dosage that would put me in a catatonic state for exactly 72 hours. Jason was already on his radio, barking orders to agents to proceed immediately to my house. Helen, this could be a recording, a fake. No, Jack's voice interrupted, as if he could hear us. Agent Link, I can hear your radio transmissions. I've been monitoring FBI communications for 3 years, waiting for this moment. Helen, I know you discovered that Genevieve has been working with Nakamura's organization. What you don't know is that she's been working for me. The room spun around me. What? Genevieve isn't your sister, Helen. Your real sister died in a car accident 15 years ago. The woman you've known as Genevieve is Agent Sarah Winters, my original FBI handler. We staged her death and created a new identity for her as your sister, to provide long-term protection for you. Through the monitors, I could see the woman I'd known as Genevieve suddenly speaking urgently into a communication device. Her entire posture had changed. She was no longer the composed criminal coordinator, but an agent receiving new orders. Everything that's happened over the past 3 days has been carefully orchestrated, Helen. My death, your discovery of the garage, the vault in Chicago, even the confrontation happening right now. It was all designed to flush out every criminal organization that had an interest in my files. Gabriel was shaking his head. This is insane. You're telling us that everything has been a carefully planned operation to identify and eliminate the criminal networks I spent 15 years documenting. Helen, you were never in real danger. Every step you took was monitored and protected. Agent Winters, Genevieve has been coordinating with FBI teams to track every criminal who came out of hiding to pursue you. I stared at the monitors showing the lobby, where Genevieve was now clearly directing FBI agents who were moving to surround the criminal groups. Louise is safe, Gabriel. She's been in FBI protective custody the entire time. The kidnapping was staged to provide motivation for Helen to take the final steps we needed her to take. Why? I whispered. Why put me through this? Why let me think you were dead? Because Helen, you were the only person I trusted completely. The only person who could believably discover my secrets and react authentically. If you had known it was all planned, the criminals would have sensed the deception. But your genuine shock, your real fear, your authentic decision-making, that's what convinced them to reveal themselves. On the monitors, federal agents were simultaneously moving in on all the criminal groups. Volkov's people, Nakamura's organization, and several other individuals I hadn't even noticed were all being arrested. I'm sorry, Helen. I'm sorry for putting you through the pain of thinking I was dead, for making you question everything about our marriage. But these people needed to be stopped, and you were the key to stopping them. I looked at the laptop containing 20 years of criminal intelligence, realizing that I'd been carrying evidence that would never need to be released, because the criminals themselves had just been captured. Jack, I said, my voice barely a whisper, are you really alive? I'm alive, Helen. And I'm coming home. I stared at the speakers in stunned silence, my mind reeling from Jack's revelation. 3 years of grief, 3 days of terror, all orchestrated. But as the shock began to fade, something else took its place, a cold, burning anger. Helen, Jack's voice came through the speakers, gentler now. Helen, I know this is overwhelming, but stop. My voice cut through the air like a blade. Just stop talking. Gabriel was watching me with concern. Aunt Helen, are you okay? Am I okay? I stood up slowly, my hands shaking, not with fear this time, but with rage. Gabriel, I buried my husband. I grieved for 3 years. I thought I was losing my mind when I found that garage. I believed my sister was a criminal who'd killed the man I loved. On the monitors, I could see federal agents restraining the last of the criminal suspects. The operation was proceeding flawlessly, just as Jack had planned. Helen, Jack's voice tried again. I understand you're angry, but you have to understand the bigger picture. We've just taken down criminal organizations responsible for hundreds of deaths, by torturing me. I shouted at the speakers, by making me think I was going insane, by letting me believe that everyone I trusted had betrayed me. Jason placed a hand on my shoulder. Helen, I had no idea. If I'd known this was an operation, you would have what? Stopped it. I turned to face him. Agent Link, did you really not know? Or were you just another actor in Jack's elaborate performance? Jason's face went pale. I swear to you, I had no idea Jack was alive. My assignment was to protect you if criminal organizations made contact. I thought I was protecting a widow, not this. Helen, Agent Winter's voice came through the speakers, not Genevieve's voice anymore, but the crisp, professional tone of a federal agent. The operation is complete. All targets are in custody. You're safe now. Safe. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. I haven't been safe for 3 years. I've been living in a lie so elaborate that I don't even know who I am anymore. Through the monitors, I watched as the woman I'd known as my sister coordinated with other agents. Every gesture, every expression was different now, professional rather than familial, competent rather than concerned. Helen, Jack's voice was pleading now. Please come home. Let me explain everything in person. Let you what, Jack? Let you explain how you decided my consent wasn't necessary for your operation. How you thought it was acceptable to put me through 3 years of grief and 3 days of terror without my knowledge. I walked to Zach's console and found the control for the building's communication system. Zach, can you cut his audio feed?
Yep.
Helen, maybe you should hear him out. Zach, cut his audio feed.
Yep.
Now, Zach's fingers moved reluctantly over the keyboard. Done. I activated the building-wide communication system, knowing that Jack would hear me through whatever surveillance equipment he'd hidden in the garage. Jack Fuller, or Jonathan Kellerman, or whoever you really are, I want you to listen very carefully. You spent 15 years of our marriage lying to me about who you were. Then you spent 3 years lying to me about being dead. You used my grief, my love and my trust as weapons in your operation. I could see federal agents throughout the building looking up at speakers, hearing my words. You may have caught your criminals, Jack, but you lost something else in the process. You lost me, because the woman who loved Jack Fuller for 18 years, she died when I discovered that garage. And the woman standing here now, the one who learned she could negotiate with killers and outmaneuver criminals, she doesn't need you anymore. I looked at Gabriel, Jason, and Zach, the three men who'd stood with me when I thought I was fighting for my life. She has real allies now, people who chose to help her without manipulating her first. I turned off the communication system and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" Gabriel asked. "Home," I said. "But not to Jack. I'm going to pack my things and leave." Because Jack was right about one thing, this does end today. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of a small cabin in the mountains of Colorado, watching the sunrise paint the peaks in shades of gold and pink. My coffee was still steaming, and for the first time in years, the silence around me felt peaceful rather than ominous. Gabriel knocked on the door behind me. "You decent Aunt Helen, come on out," I called, not turning from the view. "Coffee's fresh." He joined me on the porch with his own mug, settling into the chair I'd bought specifically for his visits. "Louise called this morning. She says the FBI finally finished debriefing her about the protective custody experience. She wants to visit next week." I smiled. Louise had handled learning the truth about her kidnapping better than any of us expected. "Tell her she's welcome anytime. This place could use some young energy." Speaking of which, Gabriel said carefully, "Jason called yesterday." My FBI ally turned friend had been checking on me regularly since I'd disappeared from Chicago without telling anyone where I was going. "How is he?" "Still feels guilty about the whole operation. Still thinks he should have figured out what was really happening." Gabriel paused. "He also said Jack has been asking about you." I took a long sip of coffee, considering my response. Jack, or Jonathan, I still wasn't sure which name fit the man I'd been married to, had tried to contact me dozens of times in the first few months. Letters, phone calls, messages through mutual acquaintances. I'd ignored them all. And what did Jason tell him? The truth. That you're somewhere safe, somewhere you chose to be, and that you don't want contact with anyone from your old life, except the people you specifically reached out to. I nodded. That had been the right answer. "Gabriel, can I ask you something?" "Always. Do you think I'm being too harsh?" Jack did save a lot of lives with that operation. He did take down criminal organizations that were genuinely dangerous. Gabriel was quiet for a moment, watching a hawk circle over the valley below us. "Aunt Helen, I think Uncle Jack, or Jonathan, or whoever he really is, I think he genuinely believed he was protecting you. But believing you're doing the right thing doesn't make it okay to take away someone's choice about their own life." I felt a weight I'd been carrying lift slightly. Gabriel understood. The young man who'd helped me cut through those garage locks 6 months ago had grown into someone whose judgment I trusted completely. Besides, he continued with a grin, "Look what happened when you finally got to make your own choices. You negotiated with Russian criminals, outsmarted multiple criminal organizations, and walked away from a situation that would have destroyed most people. Turns out you didn't need his protection after all." I laughed, the first genuinely carefree laugh I'd had in years. "I suppose I didn't." My phone buzzed with a text message. I glanced at it, expecting Gabriel or Louise, or maybe Jason checking in. Instead, it was from an unknown number. "Helen, it's Zach Morrison. I hope you're well. I wanted you to know, I'm opening a new security consulting firm, and I could use someone with your particular skill set, someone who understands how to think strategically under pressure. If you're interested in a new career, give me a call. Z." I showed the message to Gabriel, who read it with growing excitement. "Aunt Helen, that sounds amazing. You'd be incredible at that kind of work." I looked out at the mountains, then down at my phone, then at my nephew, who'd become one of my closest friends and strongest supporters. For 18 years, I'd been Helen Fuller, devoted wife. For 3 years, I'd been Helen Fuller, grieving widow. For 6 months, I'd been Helen Alves, woman rebuilding her life on her own terms. Maybe it was time to find out who Helen Alves could become when she stopped running from her past and started building toward her future. I typed back, Zach, I'm very interested. When do we start? Some stories end with people finding their way back to where they started. But the best stories end with people discovering they were strong enough to go somewhere completely new. I was ready for a new story. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.